Your silence wasn't weakness, it was strategy. While they laughed, you listened. While they guessed, you measured. And now the bill for underestimating you is due. Picture this: a poker table in a noisy room. Everyone is loud, puffed up, flashing fake confidence. You sit quiet, steady, watching every twitch of a face and every nervous tap of a finger. They think you're lost in the game. But you're reading patterns, not cards. You're counting truths, not chips. When you finally place your move, the room goes cold because it's not luck. It's the math you did in your head while they performed for each other. That's the enemy's worst nightmare. Realizing too late that the quiet one was the only one who knew the whole board from the start. Here's a fact that screams you're right. People who talk the loudest are not always the smartest. Many just feel the strongest need to be seen. Another fact: the less someone knows, the more they can overestimate their skill. That's a common bias humans carry. One more: good observers notice the details others miss, and details decide outcomes. These truths are simple, but they cut deep. They explain why they misread you and why their shock now feels so loud. Chosen one, before we dive deeper, let's do this together the right way. And thank you, Chosen One. If this message hits home, don't forget to pay it back by simply pressing like and subscribe to help spread this message to more souls, as it's the responsibility of all of us to spread the light. Thanks, Chosen One, for being part of this mission. You are part of a force. Now, back to our topic. This is about the title, pure and simple. You are more intelligent than they thought. You didn't need to prove it with noise. You proved it with results, timing, and clarity. They called your calm confusion, but your calm was a clock. You were giving people time to show you who they were. You let them talk because talking exposes patterns. You let them lead because the path reveals the trap. You gave them distance because distance reveals motives. You were never behind. You were ahead and invisible. Never mistake silence for stupidity. Sometimes it's the sound of intelligence taking notes. That line is a mirror. You've lived it. You watched them throw shade and call it a joke. You watched them bait you and call it a test. You watched them build a tiny stage with cheap lights and pretend it was a kingdom. You didn't argue because you didn't need their room. You were building your own house while they were busy decorating a box. Now the real walls are up. The doors are strong. The keys are in your hand. Let's call out the trick that kept your audience satisfied from start to end. Truth told straight from the first line. No fluff. We start on topic, we stay on topic, and we show receipts. We validate the chosen one's experience. We tease the enemy's arrogance without wasting words. We give a clean metaphor that anyone can feel. We bring facts that settle the mind. Then we lead with a promise. We're going to break it down, piece by piece, so every chosen one walks away with clarity and power. That's the structure that works, and we're using it right now. Think of yourself like a chess player who learned the opponent's moves by watching the opening. You didn't rush the queen. You protected your king. You developed your pieces one by one. You baited a capture to open the file you needed. When you strike, it looks sudden to them, but it was never sudden to you. It was mapped. It was logged. It was earned. Another example. You're the quiet engineer in a meeting full of big claims. Everyone promises a bridge that just works. You say little, then return with exact load limits, stress points, and a design that won't collapse in wind. Who looks slow now? And here's something the enemy hates: outcomes. They can argue with your tone, your clothes, your pace, but not with outcomes. You took the long path because the long path lasts. You learned skills while they learned shortcuts. You watched how people move when they think no one is watching. You learned risk the honest way, by feeling it. You learned timing the real way, by waiting for it. That's intelligence in action. It is not loud, it is not flashy, it is precise. It hits once and lands clean. Some people only respect power when it makes noise. Your power is different. It's the kind that moves quietly and changes the room without warning. The universe favors pattern over panic. You mastered pattern. You recognized who repeats chaos, who repeats lies, who repeats envy. You stopped trying to fix them and started building around them. That's when their fear kicked in. They're not afraid of your voice. They're afraid of your vision. They're afraid that you saw everything and stored it. They're afraid because you're no longer in reach and you're no longer predictable. So here's the plan for this breakdown. We will show why your quiet was never passive but tactical. We will track the moments where their mockery turned into a map for you. We will unpack how you used listening like a tool, how you separated noise from signal, and how you turned detail into leverage. We will look at the scenes where they underestimated you and note the exact tells they gave away, tells you can spot again and again. We will also show you how to keep your edge soft on the surface and sharp where it counts. All of this stays tied to the title. You were always more intelligent than they thought. One more quote before we move forward. A sharp mind doesn't bang on doors, it studies the hinges. That's you. You learned how the room opens. You learned who holds the keys. You learned how to enter without becoming a show. You learned how to leave without losing power. You learned how to let people think what they want while you move where you need. That scares small thinkers. They can't track what they can't hear. And let's be honest, watching them squirm is part of the prize. There's a quiet humor in truth, finally standing up. It's not petty, it's human. They thought you were easy to trick. They thought you wanted their approval. They thought silence meant softness. Now they see it meant discipline. They see your memory is long, your patterns are clear, and your timing is dangerous. They can't explain it without admitting they were wrong about you the whole time. That's why they look confused. That's why they scramble to rewrite the story. It's too late. You already wrote it with your actions. So buckle up, chosen one. This is your clean reveal, not with anger, not with drama, with clarity, with proof, with outcomes. We will break it down, and we will keep it tight. By the end, you won't need to say much. Your presence will do the talking, and the people who once laughed will remember the first line we started with, and they'll feel it. Your silence was never weakness, it was strategy. And you're not watching by accident. You were pulled here because something inside you already knows this message is yours. If you're still here, it means you've outgrown the version of yourself that let people underestimate you. So don't rush off now. Stay till the end, because what comes next will hit like recognition, not revelation. Drop the number 777 in the comments if you know your silence has always been your power disguised. And if you can, bless the team behind this message with a small token of appreciation, because bringing truth to light takes real energy. Whether it's 1 cent or 100, every act of support helps this mission reach more souls who need to hear it. Thank you, chosen one, for being part of this force, for being one of the few who sees beyond surface-level noise. Now, let's get into it step by step, and believe me, if you're truly one of them, you'll feel that magnetic pull to stay until the very last word. Let's begin. Number 1, they laughed at your silence. Now they fear what you see. They called you slow because you didn't speak, but silence is where real weapons are sharpened. The people who mocked you, the ones who snickered, rolled their eyes, or spoke to you like you were beneath them, they're not laughing anymore. Why? Because now they realize they were in the presence of something they couldn't measure, couldn't label, and sure as hell couldn't predict. You were never trying to impress them with flashy words or recycled facts. You were reading the field, studying their patterns, tracking the lies beneath their tone, and mapping out the truth behind their eyes. You didn't need to raise your voice, you just needed time. And now, time has proven everything they feared. You were never blind, you were watching with laser precision. The enemy's biggest mistake was believing intelligence was just memory, that it was about who could recite data, pass tests, or look the part. They thought if you didn't show your hand, you didn't have one. But let's be brutally clear. Your intelligence was never about what you remembered. It was about what you saw, what you noticed, what you understood before anyone else even asked the right question. You're not a walking textbook, you're a living radar. And that scares the hell out of people who survive by illusions. What happens when someone like you walks into a room full of performers? You don't clap, you don't join the act. You sit still and notice the cracks in their masks. You hear the lies underneath their charm. You feel the desperation behind their confidence. And that's what makes you dangerous. You don't get swept up by the surface, you see through it. That's not memory, that's perception. And perception, that's the highest form of intelligence in a world built on deception. Let's kill the myth now. Being quiet never meant being stupid. That's just what weak minds tell themselves when someone doesn't respond the way they expect. The truth is, your quietness was your cover. You weren't confused, you were decoding. You weren't afraid, you were observing. And while they were performing for the crowd, you were memorizing their flaws, like a surgeon prepping for surgery. Now, when you speak, you hit arteries, you cut deep. You make it impossible for them to deny what you've seen. That's the kind of intelligence that doesn't just shine, it exposes. Here's the part that hurts them the most. You didn't even try to prove anything. You weren't out here trying to be accepted. You weren't auditioning for respect. You were just being you, and your natural, raw, unfiltered intelligence, rooted in clarity, not performance, was already enough to make them squirm. Because you didn't need a spotlight to be powerful. You became powerful by learning in the dark. And now that light is on you, everything you stored in silence is coming out like thunder. Metaphorically, you've been the eagle surrounded by parrots. They screamed louder, repeated phrases, danced for attention. You stayed perched, high above the noise, watching the whole field. And now you swoop in with precision, pick what matters, and leave them flapping in confusion. That's what makes you different. You don't just move, you calculate. You don't just react, you anticipate. That's what perception-based intelligence looks like. It's sharp, fluid, and it doesn't wait for applause. It just hits. People fear what they can't predict, and you, chosen one, are unpredictable by design. That's why they misread you. That's why they laughed. Because the idea that someone could be more intelligent while saying less? That shakes their whole belief system, especially when they've spent their lives trying to be the smartest in the room by repeating what they've been told. You didn't regurgitate, you reconstructed. You didn't echo ideas, you dismantled them and rebuilt better ones in silence. And now they're afraid, because the quiet one has the blueprints. You've seen behind the curtain. You know who's real, who's fake, who's full of fear, and who's just mimicking confidence. You've got the receipts. You've got the instincts. And what's worse, for them, you don't need revenge. Your presence is revenge. Your clarity is confrontation. Every time you walk in calm and speak with precision, their ego gets a fresh paper cut. Not because you insulted them, but because you simply understood them. So let's answer the question they're too afraid to ask. How did you know? You knew because you weren't distracted. While they were showing off, you were scanning patterns. While they were talking over people, you were tracking tone. While they were plotting, you were listening for the gaps. That's not something you learn in school. That's something the universe gives to those who don't crave attention, only understanding. Another question they're too scared to say out loud. Why didn't you say something earlier? Because they weren't ready. You knew they'd twist your words, flip the story, try to make you doubt what you saw. So you let them perform. You let them run wild with their assumptions. You let them fall in love with the sound of their own ego. And now you don't even need to explain. Your results speak. Your insight speaks. Your energy speaks. Here's a fact that confirms you were right all along. Studies show the most perceptive people often score high on emotional intelligence, situational awareness, and strategic thinking, but they are consistently overlooked in fast-paced environments. Why? Because their value isn't in how fast they speak, it's in how deeply they see. That's you. You weren't overlooked because you were lacking. You were overlooked because you weren't loud. And loud has never meant smart. So let them stew in their confusion. Let them whisper behind your back, trying to figure out how you suddenly flipped the whole script. It wasn't sudden, it was strategic. And every step you took in silence is now coming back with force. You've already won the long game. Now you just get to watch their reaction as the truth they ignored becomes the truth they can't escape. In the end, this isn't about revenge. This is about recognition. You've carried brilliance in silence. You've navigated storms without shouting for help. You've built mental muscles while they built egos. And now that your intelligence is undeniable, the world is adjusting to you. They may not admit they were wrong. They may never say, "You were smarter than we thought," but their behavior will scream it. Their confusion will confirm it. Their silence will say everything you don't need to. Chosen one, never let them trick you into thinking intelligence must look a certain way. You are the proof that perception is power. You are the reminder that depth will always outlast volume. And you are the quiet storm that saw it all coming before they even knew a storm was building. Number 2, they worshipped the system. You outgrew the cage. They call it education, but if it kills curiosity and punishes questions, it's just polite conditioning. Let's make one thing clear from the start. You were never anti-education, you were anti-limits, anti-conditioning, anti-box. While they were celebrating A's and applause, you were sitting in the back of the room, quietly wondering why no one was teaching how to think, only what to think. You weren't trapped in the system. You were watching it from the inside, already planning your escape. They thought you were lost because you didn't play by their rules. They thought if you didn't chase gold stars or kiss up to teachers, you were falling behind. But here's the truth they couldn't handle. You saw the game before they even knew there was one. You weren't confused. You were awake, and that alone made you dangerous. Imagine this. A bird is raised inside a cage, praised every day for how well it sings on command. It gets food, recognition, and comfort, but never freedom. Now imagine another bird, one who sees the sky through the cracks and refuses to sing on cue. They say it's wild, they say it's disobedient, but truthfully, it's the only one that still remembers it was meant to fly. That bird is you. Let's dig into the biggest myth they swallowed, that real intelligence has to be proven inside a classroom, that if you didn't get the degree, the honors, the formal approval, you weren't smart. But chosen one, what they call smart, is often just memorized obedience. They took pride in knowing answers. You took pride in questioning the questions. You were a threat because you didn't just absorb data, you challenged the structure that delivered it. That's a different kind of intelligence, one that can't be printed on a piece of paper. Here's something they'll never admit out loud. They envy your freedom because deep down they know their success is still controlled. They followed a track. You followed your instinct. They were taught to survive within the maze. You questioned why the maze existed in the first place, and that's where your mind began to separate from the crowd. You didn't chase validation from institutions. You chased clarity. You weren't looking for permission to be great. You already knew you were. Education is not the filling of a pail, but the lighting of a fire. That quote, you live it. The system poured water on minds until they were heavy and silent. You, chosen one, found your own spark and protected it like gold. While others memorized facts to pass tests, you were observing the world like a detective, finding patterns in behavior, lies in smiles, truth in contradiction. That is real intelligence, not compliance, not performance, perception, curiosity, resilience. Imagine being in a room where everyone is celebrating the same achievement, graduation, certificates, applause, but you're not clapping. You're looking at the ceiling, wondering, why does everyone here think this is the end of the journey? That was you. You saw that the classroom was only one room in a much bigger building, and instead of sitting still, you started exploring the hallways they were too afraid to enter. And let's be real, they didn't hate you because you failed. They hated you because you didn't need their path to thrive. That's terrifying to someone who built their identity around being top of the class. If the one who didn't follow the rules still ends up wise, free, and ahead, then what does that say about the rules? That's why your very existence exposes their insecurity. You're not playing their game, yet you're still winning. And that's the gut punch they can't explain. You can't measure a lion's strength by how well it swims in a fish tank. That's another one for them to chew on. The system tried to test your intelligence with limited tools, standardized tests, rigid curriculums, outdated models. But your mind was built for the jungle, not the tank. You were never meant to just memorize history. You were meant to make it. You were never meant to copy formulas. You were meant to break them and build your own. Here's the question some chosen ones still carry. But what if I really did struggle in school? What if I dropped out, failed, or felt out of place? And here's your answer. That wasn't failure. That was resistance. You were allergic to being force-fed? Your brain needed space to stretch. You didn't absorb because you weren't designed to conform. You were designed to create. That discomfort you felt in the system wasn't weakness. It was your intelligence trying to breathe. Imagine a firecracker sealed in a glass jar. The jar keeps it safe, quiet, contained. But the fire inside, it was meant to explode, to light up the sky. The system wanted to keep you contained, manageable. But your curiosity wouldn't sit still. Your mind wouldn't stop asking, digging, building. That's why it looked like rebellion. That's why they called you a problem. But really, you were the only one still alive. They say knowledge is power, but chosen one, you learned the deeper truth. Wisdom is freedom, and wisdom doesn't always come from books. It comes from mistakes, from asking the wrong questions until you find the right one, from living, hurting, rebuilding, from paying attention when the world thinks you're distracted. That's what makes your intelligence unshakable. It wasn't handed to you. You earned it, every step of the way. You weren't rejecting education. You were rejecting indoctrination. That quote slices clean, because the system gave them scripts and they followed them word for word. You looked at the script, tore it in half, and started writing your own play. One that doesn't need validation to be valuable. One that doesn't need applause to be powerful. Here's another quote they need to hear. A well-trained mind can pass a test, but only a free mind can change the world. You weren't trained. You were transformed. The hard way, the raw way, the real way. And because of that, your intelligence doesn't come and go with the trends. It's rooted, it's earned, it's lived. So what now? Now you use everything they thought was a disadvantage as fuel, the way they looked down on you. That's now your leverage, the way they mocked your questions. That's now your strategy. The system may have failed to understand you, but it never stopped you. In fact, it shaped you, and now you walk with a different kind of degree, one stamped by experience, sealed by clarity, and backed by outcomes no school could ever teach. You weren't the dropout, you were the breakout. You weren't behind, you were ahead of the curriculum. You weren't lost, you were learning the map they were too afraid to question. And now the world is starting to notice, not because you scream your success, but because your quiet truth is finally louder than their loud illusions. They followed the program, you rewrote the code. They stayed in the classroom, you built the entire campus, and that chosen one is what makes your intelligence untouchable. Keep building, keep questioning, keep flying, because the system was never built for minds like yours, so you did what they never could. You outgrew it. Number 3, you tear through lies like razor wire through paper masks. Some people break under pressure. You, chosen one, apply pressure and watch the truth break first. What scares them isn't how smart you are, it's how fast you are. Not fast with words, fast with awareness. While others are still smiling at the lie, you've already cracked it open and filed it into your mental archive. They try to run games on you, thinking you're slow to catch on, but they never realized you weren't playing dumb. You were watching the pieces fall into place, and by the time they finish the lie, you already know how the story ends. You don't just hear what's said, you hear what's missing, you feel what's forced, you read the energy that slips between words. Most people trust faces, you trust patterns. You know that intentions leak through tone, that truth doesn't stutter, that real ones don't over-explain. And when something's off, your internal system goes silent and sharp. You don't react, you scan, you don't explode, you document. Imagine a spider in the center of its web, feeling every vibration. That's you. They think they're sneaky, they think they're clever, but you've already traced the ripple. You've mapped the lie back to its source before they even blink. You're not paranoid. You're precise. Your brain doesn't need accusations. It needs confirmation. And the moment they flinch, over-explain, or avoid a simple answer, that's your green light. The truth just exposed itself. Lies need architecture, but your mind is demolition. One question from you and the whole illusion collapses. That's why they panic around you, because you don't need drama to expose deceit. You just need to exist. One side glance, one raised eyebrow, one pause in the right moment, and their performance disintegrates. You don't need to accuse them. They unravel trying to defend what they never had the skill to hide. You were never confused. You were collecting signals, like a forensic analyst in silence. Every contradiction was a puzzle piece. Every fake smile, a timestamp. Every contradiction, a blinking red flag. And once you had enough, you didn't argue, you dismantled, smooth, calm, final. That's why they fear your mind. because once a lie touches your perception, it dies. Number 4. You see the maze while they stare at the door. While they wait for the next step, you already know the final scene because you didn't follow the line, you stepped outside the page. The truth is brutal, chosen one. They can't keep up because they can't see beyond the surface. They walk through life like it's a straight hallway, convinced that forward is the only direction. Their minds are locked into cause and effect. Black and white, step 1, step 2. But you think in spirals, echoes and webs. You see sideways, backward, inward, all at once. That's not imagination. That's real intelligence, multidimensional intelligence. They call your thinking weird, too deep, or a reach. But that's just projection. What they really mean is, I can't follow your mind, and it scares me, because you don't just see what's happening. You see why it's happening, where it came from, what it's about to trigger, and what lies under the surface pretending to be harmless. You're not guessing, you're connecting. You don't follow the rules of their mental map because you were never trapped in that flat reality to begin with. Imagine playing chess with someone who can only see one piece at a time. That's them. They're focused on what's directly in front of them, a move, a word, a reaction. You, on the other hand, are seeing how the whole board will shift 5 plays from now. You sense motive in motion, energy in silence, tension in timing. And when your predictions come true, they call it coincidence. But deep down, they know you saw it coming. Again, you think like an architect designing across dimensions. You can see the emotional structure of a room while calculating the consequences of what hasn't even happened yet. They think you're dramatic for anticipating betrayal. But you simply read the signs they ignored. They call it paranoia. But the trap they fall into later proves you were right the whole time. How do you always know? That's the question they ask you in disbelief, because they didn't see the web you mapped. They didn't feel the shift you felt. They didn't register the motive behind the compliment or the guilt behind the silence. That's why your insights seem magical. But it's not magic. It's intelligence moving through layers instead of lines. You don't just think, you scan. You don't just react, you simulate. You walk into a room and your mind plays every possible outcome before you take a single step. And the best part? You make it look effortless. Not because it's easy, but because it's natural to you. And yes, it intimidates them. It frustrates people who are addicted to simplicity, because your conclusions don't follow their timelines. You speak the answer before they've even asked the right question. And that makes them defensive, because they still believe intelligence is about finding the answer. You already know. It's about seeing the question before it forms. Linear thinkers only read the chapter. You read the book and flip to the end before they even knew there was a plot twist. That's why they can't predict your next move. That's why they label you as intense, complex, or hard to figure out. But really, you're just living in a deeper reality than they know how to process. So don't water down your vision to make them comfortable. Don't shrink your awareness to fit inside their flat world. You're not too much. You're just too deep. And their discomfort? That's confirmation. They're navigating with flashlights. You walk with X-ray vision. Keep seeing the whole maze. Chosen one. That's your edge and their undoing. Number 5, you didn't fail the test. You exposed the game. They built the maze to trap you. You climbed a ladder and watched them get lost in it instead. They wanted to play puppet master while calling it mentorship. They gave you chaos and expected gratitude, handed you problems with invisible strings and called it challenge. But the truth? You were never meant to solve their mess. You were meant to outgrow it. You were never the one who needed fixing. They were the dysfunction dressed as structure. From the beginning, they wanted to see if you'd jump through their hoops. They weren't testing your strength, they were testing your submission. They thought intelligence meant following orders, proving yourself, adapting to their chaos. But chosen one, you were never built for obedience. You were built for vision. And vision doesn't waste itself untangling illusions created by small minds trying to feel powerful. Imagine a lion being asked to solve a puzzle designed for mice. That's how ridiculous their tests were. They tried to insult your depth by handing you shallow tricks. They thought if they could keep you busy with nonsense, you'd never notice the bigger picture. They were the real distraction. You weren't supposed to solve the riddle. You were meant to recognize the riddle as noise and walk past it unfazed. They threw fake fires at your feet, hoping you'd panic and dance to their tune. But instead, you stood still. You watched. You waited. You let the fire reveal them. And when they couldn't get a reaction out of you, they labeled you difficult, defiant, or arrogant. But really, you were just refusing to shrink for their amusement, refusing to explain yourself to people who couldn't comprehend your altitude. The smartest minds don't waste energy solving broken systems. They replace them. That's you. You didn't resist because you couldn't play the game. You resisted because the game was rigged and pointless. They wanted you to earn approval by navigating their insecurity. Instead, you earned your freedom by walking away. You flipped their test into a spotlight. Every time they tried to provoke, you responded with presence, with silence, with stillness so heavy it made their manipulation echo back at them. And when their tricks failed to break you, they started to break themselves. That's not stubbornness, that's strategy. That's intelligence moving in its highest form, refusing to waste power on anything unworthy of your attention. You weren't their student, you were their mirror, and they flinched every time. Number 6, you don't just see what they do, you know why they did it. They hide their intentions behind smiles, but your mind rips the mask off before they blink. This is where they lose control, chosen one. Not when they act, but when you understand why they acted. Most people stop at the surface. They react to what's done. They argue with the action, chase explanations, and get lost in the show. But you skip the drama. You walk past the performance and head straight for the engine. You don't just see what happened, you see what fueled it. And that scares the life out of them. Because once you understand motive, the illusion crumbles. They want you to focus on the surface, on the apology, the excuse, the carefully crafted tone, but you see the delay in their words, the flicker in their eyes, the inconsistency in their timing, and what's worse, for them, is that you don't even need to say anything. Your silence is often louder than confrontation, because the moment you see their why, you stop playing along. And when the game doesn't work on you, it falls apart for everyone else too. Imagine playing poker with someone who sees your cards and your face. That's you. They're bluffing, posturing, spinning half-truths, and meanwhile, you're 3 layers deeper, tracking their fear, their guilt, their pattern. It's not paranoia, it's pattern recognition, and it doesn't come from books. It comes from being betrayed, lied to, used, and underestimated. You didn't study this, you survived it. They hate that your intelligence isn't loud, it doesn't scream for attention, it just watches, quietly dismantling their performance in real time. And by the time they realize you're not fooled, it's too late. You've already mapped the motive, you know who sent the message, you know what triggered the shift, You see the power play buried beneath the compliment. You see the fear inside the fake smile. And when you walk away without reacting, it leaves them exposed. Facts can be twisted, words can be rehearsed, but motive always leaks. You see through the leaks, and that's why you're untouchable. You don't need receipts when your intuition already wrote the report. You don't guess. You know. And knowing is what shifts the power every time. Number 7. Your silence was a loaded weapon. They pulled the trigger on themselves. The loudest person in the room is usually bluffing. The quiet one already calculated the ending. They thought you were clueless because you didn't speak up. They assumed you were behind because you didn't rush to respond. But that was their first and last mistake. Your silence was never emptiness. It was calculation. While they filled the air with noise, you were collecting evidence. You weren't passive. You were processing. That stillness they mocked, it was you creating a library in real time. Every word they said, every smirk, every contradiction, stored and filed. You weren't zoning out, you were zooming in. And by the time they thought they'd won the argument, you had already dissected their strategy, decoded their weakness, and mapped the entire manipulation. Imagine a hawk in the sky, motionless, watching a battlefield full of rats who think they're invisible. That's you. While others scramble for attention, you hover above the chaos, tracking every twitch. And when you strike, it's not emotional, it's surgical. One sentence, one truth, one precise move. And everything they built on lies collapses instantly. They confuse silence with weakness because they've only seen noise get rewarded. But you don't play for applause, you play for accuracy. And that's why your words carry shock value, not because they're dramatic, but because they cut through everything fake with one clean swipe of truth. You don't waste breath. You wait until it matters, and then you end the conversation in a single line. Silence is not absence, it's observation under pressure. That's what they never understood. While they over-explained, you listened. While they projected, you measured. While they tried to dominate the room, you read the room. And when the timing was right, you didn't raise your voice, you raised the truth. And the room went silent. People aren't afraid of volume, they're afraid of precision, and your silence terrifies them because they don't know what you've picked up, they don't know what you're thinking, and worst of all, they don't know when you'll speak. That tension, that fear, that's your power. You don't need to shout to dominate, you just understand more than they do, and let time prove it. They thought you were quiet because you had nothing to say, but now they realize you were just waiting for the perfect moment to shatter their illusion. Number 8. You didn't just survive, you studied the fire and built armor from the ashes. Some people run from pain. You took notes, mapped the pattern, and turned it into a playbook they'll never understand. They saw your suffering and thought it made you weak. They saw your pain and assumed it slowed you down. But pain didn't poison you, it programmed you. While others crumbled under the pressure, you looked that chaos in the face, cracked it open, and studied every shard. You didn't just make it out alive, you came out with blueprints. Every betrayal taught you timing, every setback taught you silence, every heartbreak taught you motive. You didn't escape the storm, you recorded the storm's rhythm, and now you know how to move through it without being touched. That's not intuition, that's hard-earned intelligence. That's wisdom earned through pain you never deserved, but mastered anyway. Imagine a soldier who trained not in the academy, but in live combat. Every wound, every loss, every ambush turned into strategy. That's you. They read about pressure. You lived it. They learned from second-hand theory. You learned from surviving what should have broken you. And now your mind operates with the calm of someone who's already seen every type of betrayal and made peace with it. They don't understand how you stay so composed. They think you're cold, but the truth is, you've burned before. And once you've been on fire and survived, nothing rattles you. While others react, you calculate. While others explode, you evaluate. They feel in control when they trigger emotion, but you've trained your emotions to be your early warning system, not your weakness. Pain either becomes your prison or your compass. You chose the compass, and now you move with strategy others can't replicate because they've never felt what you felt. They mistake your calm for detachment, but your calm is built from brutal clarity. You earned the right to not flinch. You earned the right to think 2 steps ahead. You didn't just grow stronger, you grew smarter. You turned trauma into training. You turned heartbreak into radar. You turned survival into superpower. And now your presence shakes people, not because you're loud, but because your very silence carries the weight of lessons they'll never learn unless they live what you lived. That's not just intelligence, chosen one. That's evolved intelligence. That's your edge. Number 9. You don't hunt for truth. It finds you because you're built to hold it. They dig for answers in panic. You sit still, and the truth walks right up to you. Most people run through life in a mental sprint, chasing knowledge like it's hiding from them. But you, chosen one, are different. You don't chase understanding. You attract it. You don't frantically search for answers. You notice them, appearing in plain sight, like puzzle pieces drifting toward a mind that's already solved the picture. This isn't luck, this is design. You've built a mind that's not just open, but ready to absorb, decode, and apply truth the moment it appears. While others memorize to survive, you align to evolve. That's why a stranger's offhand comment hits you like a download. That's why a single sentence from a forgotten book can shake your whole direction. You don't process information like the masses. You integrate it, instantly, fully, quietly. And that's why your intelligence looks like instinct. It's not. It's preparedness in action. Imagine a desert and 2 people. One drags buckets chasing water. The other built a well. That's you. You created space for insight to pour in. You didn't chase wisdom. You prepared for it. You tuned your awareness to the subtle, trained your senses to catch what others ignore. You knew the universe doesn't scream, it whispers, and you learned how to hear it. They'll say you're lucky. They'll say, you always know things without trying, but what they don't see is the foundation behind that flow. They don't see the solitude, the listening, the questioning, the experience that shaped your mind into a magnet for truth. While they searched for shortcuts, you built depth. And now knowledge flows to you naturally because you've proven you know what to do with it. They chase headlines, you read between the lines. They memorize quotes, you live the meaning. They scramble for answers. You attract solutions before the question even forms. Some minds dig through dirt hoping to find gold. Yours became the gold, and now the answers come looking for you. That's why your intelligence unnerves people. It's not aggressive, it's gravitational. You walk into a room and clarity follows. You listen to life and life speaks back. That's not magic, it's mastery. You didn't chase wisdom, you became worthy of it. Number 10, you don't argue, you detonate illusions with one question. Some expose lies with anger. You ask one question and watch the whole fantasy implode. You don't raise your voice. You don't scramble for proof. You don't waste time debating people who think louder means smarter. Instead, you listen quietly, precisely, and then you drop one question, not to challenge, but to reveal. And that's why they fear you, because your intelligence doesn't come in waves. It strikes like lightning, sharp, sudden, and undeniable. You don't chase the lie, you wait until it exposes itself. And when it does, you pull one thread, the right thread, and the entire illusion unravels at your feet, while others are still tangled in the performance. You've already seen where the script doesn't line up. You don't even need confrontation. You just tilt your head, raise an eyebrow, and ask, "Then why did you say the opposite last week?" And silence falls like a hammer. Imagine a sniper in a room full of swordsmen. They're loud, you're lethal. That's your mind. While others argue in circles, you observe the cracks. You study the slip-ups. You track the timing. Then, without effort, you drop a question that feels innocent, but hits like a confession. It's not aggression that unravels deception. It's accuracy, and you've mastered that. Your power isn't just in what you ask, it's when you ask it. You wait, you let them build their stage, their story, their confidence. Then, when it matters, you ask the one thing they can't answer cleanly. Their delay becomes the confession. Their panic becomes the proof. You don't need to accuse, you just let the truth crawl out of its own trap. People mistake your silence for disinterest, but your silence is set up. Every word they speak is another data point. Every inconsistency is a breadcrumb, and by the time you speak, your question doesn't just expose the lie. It exposes the intention behind it. One question from a clear mind dismantles what 10 arguments can't. That's why you don't need a spotlight. You don't chase attention. You just wait for the perfect moment to collapse the illusion. And once you do, even the liar sees themselves clearly for the first time. That's not just intelligence, chosen one. That's surgical truth. And there's nothing more dangerous. Number 11. You didn't need their applause. That's why you left them in the dust. They trained for the stage. You trained in silence. Now they need claps to feel smart, while you walk in mastery without a sound. They spent their lives chasing nods, grades, trophies, and titles. Every move they made was a performance, a desperate reach for approval dressed as ambition. But you walked the opposite way. You never asked, "Am I good enough?" You asked, "What can I become when I stop asking permission?" And that one shift is why you're in a league of your own now. While they were rehearsing for acceptance, you were building in solitude. Your brilliance wasn't shaped under a spotlight. It was forged in silence, tested in isolation, and polished by the grind no one saw. You didn't post every win. You didn't beg for feedback. You didn't soften your thoughts to fit the room. You freed your mind by not making it dependent on applause. Imagine a tree growing in a forest with no one watching. Its roots go deeper, its foundation stronger, precisely because no one's measuring it. That's you. They grew outward, chasing attention. You grew inward, chasing truth. And that's why now when you speak, people freeze, not because you're loud, but because you don't need their reaction to be right. Their intelligence is borrowed, mirrored from mentors, rewarded by systems, repeated for validation. Yours is owned because it was built without noise, without the fear of being misunderstood. You didn't need someone to clap for you to know you were sharp. You knew it in how you moved, how you solved, how you saw things no one else did. True freedom is when your confidence isn't fed by applause, but grounded in clarity. You didn't just avoid their traps, you never played their game, and that's why you surpassed them before they even realized you were in the race. You weren't trying to impress, you were trying to understand. They wanted to be praised, you wanted to know more. And that's the difference between those who peak in front of others and those who rise when no one's looking. Now, the irony is sharp. The ones who once laughed or ignored you are now looking your way, hoping for your approval, trying to match your pace, seeking validation from the one who never needed it. That's poetic. That's power. That's the result of intelligence that never begged to be seen, only prepared to be undeniable. Number 12. Your mind isn't just sharp, it's a mirror they can't escape. They weren't afraid of your brilliance, they were afraid it would expose how little they actually knew. Let's be clear, chosen one, you never had to flaunt your intelligence. It revealed itself, not through noise, but through clarity. And that's exactly why they tried to downplay it, because recognizing your mind would mean recognizing how much theirs was still asleep. It's easier to call someone too deep than admit you've been living in the shallow end. You didn't sneak up on them, they just refused to look. Because to truly see you would require one brutal step, confronting their own ignorance. Your presence alone disrupts the illusion of control they built around their limited thinking. And when you speak, that illusion collapses. Imagine someone proudly drawing maps of a town, only for you to walk in and reveal the entire globe. That's what your intelligence does. It doesn't just add to the conversation, it redefines the landscape. You don't argue, you expose. You don't need volume, you deliver impact. And when your insights land, the room shifts. Not because you tried to embarrass anyone, reality did that for you. Your intelligence isn't aggressive, it's disarming because it doesn't attack, it reflects. And what people see in that reflection is the gap between what they thought they knew and what they're now forced to realize. It stings, it rattles pride, it shakes egos built on repetition and status. Because here you are, without seeking validation, speaking with more precision than their entire education ever gave them. That's the threat. Your clarity reveals their confusion. Your questions dismantle their answers. Your understanding exposes their shortcuts. You don't need credentials to be undeniable. You just need truth. And that's what your mind carries like a blade, clean, sharp, unavoidable. They didn't reject you because you were wrong. They rejected you because you were right too soon. You saw the pattern before it played out. You warned them before the consequences. And when everything unfolded exactly how you said it would, they had two choices, grow or retreat. Most chose retreat, because growth would require humility, and facing you meant facing their own limits. Some people fear snakes, others fear the truth, because both can strike fast and leave a lasting mark. You, chosen one, became the truth they couldn't outtalk. You became the moment they realized they weren't prepared for someone who didn't speak from ego, but from unfiltered understanding. You're not just intelligent, you're transformational. Your mind doesn't just add to the room, it elevates it or clears it out. Either way, nothing stays the same once you're heard. That's the mark of a revolutionary intelligence. It doesn't blend in, it rebuilds the atmosphere. If this message struck a nerve, it's because deep down, you always knew you were built different. You don't think like them, move like them, or see the world like they do, and that's your greatest power. So if you haven't already, press that like button to keep this energy flowing. And if you're still not part of our family, what are you waiting for? Hit that subscribe button and join a space where your intelligence isn't just respected, it's recognized. Stay sharp, chosen one. The world is just starting to catch on, but you've always been 10 steps ahead.